Millions of Americans rely on animals for assistance.
If I didn't have him, I would really struggle.
But Wisconsin is tightening the leash on fakes.
It's out of control and it needs to stop.
A Fox 6 investigation finds one Wisconsin website selling disability letters to clients they've never met.
And that's somehow mental health care.
This week on Open Record,
It's a gross violation of the standard of practice.
fill-in-the-blank form letters
Is it fraud?
and a questionable relationship
I do not think it's unethical at all.
have a Wisconsin psychologist under investigation. From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Bryan Polcyn, and I'm joined by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined by Contact 6's Jenna Sachs. Again, thanks, Jenna.
No problem.
We are recording this episode on Tuesday, November 25th. It is Thanksgiving week. Earlier this week, actually on Sunday, Fox 6 investigators aired a pair of stories on a subject that impacts millions of people, but it is one that is rife with confusion, misunderstanding, and in some cases, outright abuse. We're talking about service animals and emotional support animals. Coming up, we're going to explain the difference between those two things, and there is a big difference. We're going to break down the legislation that is just one signature away from becoming law, and we're going to take you step by step through our investigation of Touch ESA, an online letter writing service in Waukesha County. Finally, we're going to answer some of the questions you submitted to us this week. You had a lot of them. You had some good ones. We'll address as many as we can. All of that starting right after this.
Honored, trusted, respected. The Fox 6 Investigators.
We are Milwaukee's investigative team.
Because you matter.
All right, we are back on Open Record. We are talking service animals and emotional support animals. Bryan, this is not the first time you have tackled this issue. So what got you into it again in 2025?
And you guys know one of my favorite stories of all time is the
Really
one I did
memorable
9 years
one.
ago.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was 2016. It's hard to believe it's been that many years. But that started because at the time, there was a rise in complaints, a surge in complaints about emotional support animals on airplanes. You guys might remember we were seeing
A lot of
turkeys
videos. It
and
was
peacocks
everything.
and all kinds of crazy things on airplanes. And of course, people taking their dogs. And actually what prompted that story to begin with was a woman in Cudahy with a duck she wanted to live with. And we heard there was going to be a public hearing, a meeting about this because she wanted to live with her duck. And Cudahy said they were going to pass an ordinance that said no ducks. And she said, I have a right to live with my duck. And I thought, this is crazy. I want to hear about it. Turns out she was talking about rights under the Fair Housing Act. So you had the Fair Housing Act and the Air Carrier Access Act, both of which carved out room for emotional support animals, which, by the way, have nothing to do with the ADA. The Americans with Disabilities Act says nothing about emotional support animals. It was only these two areas. Well, since 2016, the Air Carrier Access Act has been changed. People cannot just take their pets on flights anymore and call them emotional support animals. They have to pay for their pets. So you see a lot fewer pets at the airport now. Only genuine service animals can go on unless an airline otherwise, I guess, wants to allow it. But in 2016, we sort of wanted to prove the point about some of these websites that were selling a letter that would declare your animal a service animal or an emotional support animal, I should say. And you could do it for, $50, $100. Yeah. And to make it to make the point, we wanted to be absurd. So I got a letter for an emotional support goat. And we took the goat to the art museum. And we took it to the movie theater and Starbucks and Lululemon and the Milwaukee Public Market.
Yeah.
And my favorite part of that story was actually what makes this such a concern is that I just had a letter in my hand that said I had a prescription for a goat. And all I did was show it to people who were clearly immediately saying, we can't have a goat in here.
Right.
And I showed them my letter and they would go, okay, I guess we're okay here. And I'm watching a movie like Tina Fey had a movie out at the time. I'm sitting in the front row watching Tina Fey with popcorn and a goat. It was crazy.
And what's the harm in having those animals out and about? Is it that they get in fights with one another or they make messes?
There's a lot of problems. So first of all, the law doesn't give them rights to be anywhere that pets are not, but people don't know that, and that's the whole point. And we'll talk more about sort of their interaction with service animals and things, but I should actually answer the question you asked me, which was why now in 2025? 9 years later, we're hearing this is still a concern in housing and in all those public places where people are just showing up with ESAs thinking that because I have a letter, I can take them anywhere I go. I love my dogs. I love my cats. They can go anywhere with me because I have a letter. Well, that's not true. but a lot of people don't know that. And it actually has prompted state lawmakers in Wisconsin to push legislation to try to kind of rein this in. When I saw that legislation, I started interviewing people again and finding out that this problem hasn't gone away. In fact, in some cases, it's only gotten worse.
Who supports it?
And
what's the legislation?
So the legislation specifically calls for a few things. First of all, it calls for the creation of a $200 fine for faking a service animal, a genuine service animal. So you have a dog out in public, you slap a vest that says service animal on it. It has no training, it's poorly behaved, but you say this is my service animal. You could be fined $200 under this legislation. That's a bit controversial. We'll talk about it. You could also be fined $500 if you present your landlord with documentation of an emotional support animal that is fraudulent, that is not legitimate. And how you prove that is all a big part of the question here. But then finally, one of the other things it would do is it would require, and this is a key here, a 30-day relationship between a therapist or doctor and you to declare your animal an emotional support animal. And what they're trying to head off with this 30-day limit is the online, I paid you $50.
Yeah.
I got a letter in 24 hours. You don't know anything about me. You haven't evaluated me. You've read my answers to a few questions, and here's your letter. They're trying to at least head that off to say it's one thing to have a relationship with a genuine therapist or doctor who says, I see the diagnoses, I've diagnosed you with whatever mental health conditions, and I see how this animal helps you, and therefore I believe this is important for you to have. The difference between that and I bought a letter online. Whether it's going to accomplish that, if there are ways around that, that's a whole different picture, but that's what the law is intended to do.
So before we get into reactions to this legislation and how people feel about it, I just heard you use two different terms, service animal and emotional support animal. Can you tell us the difference there?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that, because even though I say it and I say it quickly, I think it blows past some people because it's tricky. And here's the thing, very simple. I'm going to start with service animals. The Americans with Disabilities Act defines service animals very clearly as dogs, and in some cases miniature horses. That's the only exception, but that's so rare we don't even really need to talk about that. Dogs of any breed that are task trained, specifically individually trained to help with to do work for or assist a person with a disability. That's it. That's the definition. You don't have to have professional training. There is no certificate. There is no registration. You simply have to have an animal that is trained to perform tasks or do work for your disability. And that's it. And because there's no registration, because there's no other sort of test, it does make enforcement of any sort of regulations or laws here difficult. And we'll talk more about that too. But that's a service animal. An emotional support animal can be any kind of animal. It doesn't just have to be dogs. It can be a cat. It can be a snake. It can be a giraffe. I mean, I don't know if anybody really has an emotional support giraffe, but you never know. We had a goat, right? We've heard of alligators and peacocks and all kinds of crazy things. What the only requirement is that it doesn't do any tasks. It doesn't have to be trained. It just needs to provide you emotional comfort. But there's one thing further than that. To get any sort of rights out of having an emotional support animal, it has to be an animal that helps you with a mental health disability. The comfort has to ameliorate the symptoms of your disability, which means you need a professional who diagnoses you not only with that mental health disability. Maybe it's PTSD, maybe it's severe anxiety, maybe it's chronic depression. They also have to essentially attest that the animal you own helps you with those symptoms and helps you function in daily life. And that's really where the law is not what's being practiced generally in most cases.
You did interview a woman named Carissa Tank.
Yeah.
She trains the service animals. So I'm sure she has a lot to say about this. I mean, I learned a lot in watching your stories about anyone can go on Amazon and buy the service vest, anyone can do this, that, and the other thing. So how does she feel about all of this?
What I've heard from, not just from Carissa, but the most people who I've heard who are upset about the current situation are people with genuine service animals, because they do have a right to go wherever their owners go. Service animals do. Under the law, they are a part of you. They're an extension of you. They have a legal right to go where pets cannot go. But they've gone through extensive training. In most cases, a lot of time and money has been invested in these animals. They can be tens of thousands of dollars worth of investment. And someone out in public with a genuine service animal sees an untrained animal sniffing at their dog, approaching their dog, attacking their dog, barking, doing other things. It's very disruptive, and it can, in fact, spook the service animal and ruin all kinds of training. In some cases, they use the term in the service animal sort of industry, washing a dog, especially dogs still in training. They can get spooked by one encounter in public and you have to start from scratch. And that's very problematic. So Carissa said she supports this legislation. Not everyone is on board, though. And the number one opponent we heard from here was Disability Rights Wisconsin. These are advocates for the disabled. Their concern is, as I mentioned earlier, that there's no enforcement mechanism here. There's no way to prove a service animal is a service animal. There are only two questions that restaurants or bars, hotels, other places of public entertainment can ask. The only two questions they can ask under the ADA are, is that a service animal? Yes or no? And what tasks is it trained to perform? They can't ask, what's your disability? Prove to me that it does these things you say. That's it. So how do you enforce it? That's certainly a question, but there are still a lot of people in the restaurant industry, hotels, other sorts of things that support this and say it's needed.
Yeah, you interviewed someone from the Restaurant Association.
Yeah.
What is the general perspective from businesses who have to allow these animals in if they see the paperwork and can only ask a couple of questions?
Well, I think they say they feel like they're between a rock and a hard place because the law doesn't really give them much. They can only ask those two questions. And I think what we heard from the Restaurant Association is even if this isn't easy to enforce, they want a law on the books that sends a message. They really want the education for the public to hear this is illegal or this is a problem. You could be fined for this unless you have a genuine service pet, which is welcome. There are regulations under what I'm thinking of, restaurants, food code. The Wisconsin food code is very explicit that you can't have animals where food is being made.
Right.
So inside a restaurant, you can't have animals unless it's a genuine service animal. They want to be in a stronger position to say, if that's not a genuine service animal, we have to ask you to leave because this is in violation of the food code.
You also interviewed a man named Chad Stevens.
Yeah.
So can you explain who he is and how you came in contact with him?
And we're going to talk to him in just a minute here. He's going to join us live on the podcast. But this was the whole second part of my story, which is I mentioned this places they'll write these letters. And Chaz Stevens tested one of them. And it's based right here in Wisconsin. We came across Chaz because we had put a message out to the public saying, tell us about your experiences with emotional support animals. Have you seen any behaving badly in public? Kind of what's your perspective? He saw that, he reached out and he said, you guys have a place right there in southeastern Wisconsin that is selling these letters. I have tested them and they're not doing proper evaluations. So Chaz is the former owner of a site called ESA Doggy. We'll talk to him about that did write some of these letters. He says that over the years, he tried to change his practice to comply with the spirit and letter of the Federal Fair Housing Act, but by doing more thorough questions and examinations and things, but he couldn't be competitive with the other sites that were selling letters for $50, and eventually it put him out of business. So he has now flipped. He is now what he calls a public interest tester. He goes out and tests these other sites to expose them for what he says is fraud or misrepresentation or just not following the letter of the law. And he had tested Touch ESA and found that they gave him a letter without doing any evaluation of him at all.
So speaking of testing, we at the station put this to the test as well. How did that play out?
Yeah, so I hear from Chaz and I hear his story and he's got all the receipts, but I can't rely on someone else to just say this happened. I want to see, okay, is this still going on? And what happens if we reach out? I mean, Chaz set up a particular scenario to make it more likely he was going to get this letter. I said, I want to see what happens if a typical customer comes through, fills the form out, and what happens. So we had a producer fill out the form online. There's a questionnaire, about 80 questions, took her 15 minutes. That's it. She got a letter. No contact with a therapist. She never talked to her, never met with her, never had so much as a telehealth visit or a conversation. She gets a letter diagnosing her with conditions, saying she needs Roxy, her Rottweiler. This therapist doesn't even know if Roxy exists. Turns out Roxy is a real Rottweiler, but she didn't know, had no way of knowing that was the case. So we wanted to prove, and what we did is it verified that what Chaz said is what happened, and now it got us looking further at Touch ESA.
Interesting. So did you talk to any other doctors or anyone in the medical community?
Yeah, and I'll get through this quickly so we can get to Chaz, but we did talk. I didn't want to just rely sort of on my own feelings about this. I want to know, what do the experts say? Yeah. Is there a standard for assessing emotional support animals? I started with the Wisconsin Psychology Association, and they kept trying to find someone who could talk to me, and ultimately they said, we don't have anyone who can speak to this. So I got nothing from them. But I did end up speaking to Dr. Jeffrey Youngren, who is a professor of psychology at the University of New Mexico. He's also a published researcher who he published an ESA assessment model. He not only says that there needs to be a much more thorough and rigorous examination of both the client and the animal, he doesn't believe the therapist should be writing these letters at all. And I've since spoken to someone who sent me a letter from the American Counseling Association that says a similar thing, that this is actually not something therapists should be doing because their job, their expertise is in diagnosing their client and helping their client. Unless they have special training in animal bonds with humans or animal behavior and things like that, they're really out of their league. They're out of their lane in saying, yes, you need an emotional support animal. So they shouldn't be doing it at all, according to these experts. But if they do, they certainly need to be doing a more thorough examination, is what we heard.
You talked about Touch ESA and how we applied for the letter and got the stuff. And most of the time, like, you'll go after or reach out to these companies and say, do you want to talk or sit down? Sometimes they ignore you. Sometimes they say no comment. Yeah. Not this time. The owner of Touch ESA.
I did not expect Chris Sass to say, I'd like to not only do an interview, I'll come to FOX6 News.
Yeah.
Great. And what I like about that is you can ask real questions. You can get real answers. And I don't know that he expected some of the questions I was going to ask, as you could tell by some of the answers in the interview. Ultimately, what Chris Sass says is he's done this as a passion project. It's not a big moneymaker for him. He had a daughter who had an emotional support animal. He saw how it helped. He wanted to help others. And he wanted to sort of cut the red tape out of the process to ease the stress of a situation where you're trying to move somewhere, you want to keep your pet, you're worried you can't, and you may not have time or money to establish this big relationship. So he wanted to make it easier. He says that's why he started this program. It took him a while to peel back the onion and admit that the doctor or the psychologist he's using to sign all these letters is someone that he has a very close relationship with. In fact, they not only share business space, office space, but they share a house together. They are in a relationship, which raises some questions about sort of how they do this together. Is there any sort of conflict of interest? He says he does not believe there is. I think Chaz Stevens, we're going to talk to, would probably disagree with that. And I want to get to Chaz because not only did he do this test, but something happened the day before our story. We're going to break some news here on Open Record because something truly bizarre happened involving Dr. Lori Gebhardt, the one who signed the letter for our producer, the one who signed the letter for Chaz Stevens. She is currently under an open investigation by the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services, and that was even before what happened Saturday occurred. We're going to talk about that when we come right back after this.
Welcome back to Open Record. We want to welcome Chaz Stevens to the podcast. Chaz, you're the former owner of a company called ESA Doggy. What is that, and why did you recently decide to shut that business down?
Well, what was that? It was a labor of love that I started in 2016 with an acquaintance of mine, a lady friend of mine. And I spent 10 years of my life figuring out everything about my own mental health and the mental health of others. And I realized the value of animal-assisted mental health care. And then the laws changed because, as I mentioned on Brian's show, I was early on part of the problem. And didn't sleep well at night. So I straightened my act up. I flied right in this, what they call the spirit of fair housing. And eventually that put me out of business because I couldn't compete.
And so now you describe yourself as a public interest tester of other ESA sites. And one of the sites you tested was Touch ESA right here in Elm Grove, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Milwaukee in Waukesha County. First of all, how did you select Touch ESA, and tell me about what happened in that experience?
So let me just correct one point before I get to that. So Chris Sass says it's a labor of love. He charges $100 a letter. He sold 7,000 letters. That's my math is $700,000. So he's put almost $1 million in his bank account for doing nothing. Touch ESA came on my radar in 2017. They were scurrilous out of the gate. And I just waited around and the opportunity presented itself. So they are one of many. I have 2 letter mills ongoing in Florida Circuit Civil Court here in Broward County. I have 3 more, 2 national players. One's going to end up in federal court over RICO. So it's an ecosystem of fraud.
So let's talk about Touch ESA for a moment. What did you see about them that you say it presented an opportunity, and what did you do? You have actually used the term that you trapped him, and
Yes.
he and Dr. Gebhardt have said that you are simply a competitor who is engaging in a campaign of retribution or something like that. What do you mean by you trapped him? And tell me how that went about or came
Sure,
about.
it's really simple. It's a question of mathematics or money, actually. I ended up paying my therapist a couple $100 to do the task. I know what it takes to get the job done right, and there's no way you can do it for $49. So they were doing something wrong, and I know the script. I knew exactly how they were going to cut the corners, and they issue letters instantly. So they issue a letter that is fraudulent from the get-go, right out of the box. And I knew the corner they were going to cut is the fact that they were just pumping out these letters. Chris Sass was auto-penning these letters. You know, when he said, Brian, when he said on your show, oh, I made a mistake, I fixed it, he auto-penned it. He practiced the unlicensed practice of healthcare.
And we're going to talk
so
about
that's
how
he
we're going to
fixed
talk about how you know that in a minute. But one thing I do want to point out, and they have made a point of this in some of the emails I've now seen, which is you originally reached out in June and said, I have these certain disorders and I need this letter and I need it quick. I'm moving to California. And then a few months later, you said, life changes. I need one for Florida now. Can you get me one quick? Chris says he was on the road. He thought he was helping out an existing customer. So he reached out to Lori and said, can we get a signed letter? I'll get you his evaluation later, only to find out after you revealed who you were and what you were doing, oops, there's no evaluation. This person wasn't a customer at all. They say you set him up by sort of creating this, hey, we were, I talked to you back in June. Now I just need a new letter. Can you address that at all? Do you believe that you entrapped him in some way?
Entrapment is only to criminal, but we're going to skip that entire thing. At the end of the day, whether I was an existing client or not, doesn't preclude the need for her to go out and speak with me. So let me give you a little inside mental health care. Why one of the things that kept me up at night here at ESA Doggy is if you did this and they issued, you're a therapist and you issue somebody a letter, right? So what's her face? Gebhardt issues me a letter. She doesn't verify me. I then go out and commit self-harm. She has a liability issue. She should have verified through informed consent and through her assessment, suicidal ideation, all these other things, really inside baseball. All that boils down to the fact that she didn't issue a letter back in January or June, supposedly. Chris Sass somehow has access to my therapy notes in another company that she's supposedly a vendor, guarded by a HIPAA silo. And he decides, oh, that's not the Chaz Stevens. He's a new Chaz Stevens, Chaz 2. And we're going to issue a letter. But we're going to issue the second letter, because we don't do ever the qualifications.
Well, one thing I want to point out to the people who are watching this who haven't seen the stories is, while our producer went through and filled out an application and answered 80 questions that they claim are enough to diagnose, and I have experts who say that's nonsense, but they say the questionnaire is enough to have diagnosed her. You never filled out a questionnaire. You never answered
like a mental
any
health
questions.
questionnaire?
No mental health questionnaire, no screening questionnaire, never talked to Lori Gebhardt. So it does sort of raises the question, how could she possibly diagnose you and say you need an animal for these things if she has no evaluation to go off of and she has no personal contact with you whatsoever? What was she basing that on?
Fraud.
Now, I have asked both Chris Sass and Dr. Lori Gebhardt to join us for an interview and to join us on this podcast. They did not respond to my request. I want to be clear about that. We didn't just bring Chaz Stevens on. I want to sit down, as I did once with Chris Sass. I want to sit down with him and his girlfriend / business partner or contractor, Lori Gebhardt, and ask him some of these questions. So when he says things like this is fraud, I asked Chris Sass in our interview, do you believe this is fraud? He hemmed and hawed and said, is it fraud? He believes because he issued you a refund, in fact, it is not fraud. And then he followed up later and said, actually, you're the one who committed fraud by the way you represented yourself.
That's what he's going with. Excellent. So in the state of Florida, where I live, Gephardt has to comply with Wisconsin law, and Gephardt has to comply with Florida law because she's operating under the SIPAC. SAS has to operate. It's called the long arm of the law here in Florida. He is under the reach of Florida law if I take this to court. And in court, what's called FDUPTA, the Florida Deceptive Unfair Trade Practicing Act, which I have 2 active cases right now, one going to permanent injunction for these factually identical operations. The fact that he issued me a letter, or she issued me a letter, or they did because I think they pierced their veil of their corporation, that letter was fraudulent.
All right, I want to take you to one more thing before, because I know we're a little short on time because we've got to get to another segment where we answer some questions. I want to make sure we get through this, Chaz, and I'm sorry to cut you short here, but I want to ask about this because we have what we reported. You got the letter. They did no evaluation. We know you filed a complaint against Dr. Gephardt, and that has launched an open investigation that has been opened by the Psychology Examining Board. But the day before my story aired, you got an email. Well, sort of you. It was an alias you have used to do other tests of other sites. And
Yes,
you
sir.
had actually published about one of those interactions with this alias's email address and name. And you use the name, and I'm a little confused between, in some places I've seen it as Dirk Adams, and in other places I've seen that you used, of all things, Dirk Diggler, who is a character from a movie that we won't get into right now. But most people of our era should have probably recognized that name. She did not. She reached out to you or to Dirk at this email address, apparently thinking that it was someone you had tested and targeted like you had her and Chris, and she wanted to team up with them. But in fact, she was writing you.
Yes.
And tell me what happened once you realized what was going on.
We're on a rated G show, so I'm not going to tell you my reaction. It was beyond surreal that here she is, an afternoon of discussions with a fella that she thought that was going to be her compatriot and and her brothers in arms. She's going to create some form of, in her own words, a class action suit against me. Good luck on that, honey.
And to be clear, you did not immediately tell her, this is Chaz Stevens. You let her kind of set her own trap. Is that right?
Napoleon said, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. So I just let her talk. And God, the emails, Brian, she gave me the game plan. She told me the timeline down to the minute and where she made mistakes. And when you match up, she sent you a letter. And when you match up the letter she sent to Fox and you match up the emails that she put in her own handwriting, not by ChatGPT, which was the letter that she wrote to you, you're like, yeah, and there's a problem here, honey.
So I want to read from one of those emails. And this was an email that was dated, I believe it was Saturday, November 22nd. Our story aired on the 23rd. So she knows the story's coming. We're running promos. They're obviously, preparing for that to come out. And one of the things she writes to you is this: I take full accountability and responsibility for my decision to give Chris permission to use my electronic signature on the ESA letter without having reviewed the evaluation, under the assumption that the eval was already reviewed and approved by the California clinician. That's what she thought was the existing customer that Chris told her about. I was completely wrong in allowing my electronic signature to be used without having reviewed the evaluation and contacting the customer if necessary. I can assure you, without question, that will never happen again. What is she admitting to right there?
The use of medical marijuana, I believe. I don't know, Brian. I've been scratching my head. She walked into the police station with a GoPro and said, "Here, I recorded the entire crime. Here's my camera."
Well, hyperbole aside, though, what is she actually admitting to there? It sounds like she's saying, as a clinician, I let someone who has no rights to any of this use my electronic signature to sign the letter.
She's telling you exactly how they do business. Chris uses my signature and issues these letters. It happened to you. It happened to your team. It happened to me over a span of 2 months, a month or two. You got a letter, no therapy. I got a letter, no therapy. Oops, but Chaz, he's entrapping us somehow. Do you not think that bug is actually the feature of their business? This is how they make money. They keep it down because they don't have to do any work on their side. They just have an auto pen. They have a piece of software that generates these preform, fill in the blank. What do you call them? Mad Lib letters. That's how they did it.
Chaz, I want to wrap this up with you by bringing this back to the issue at heart. Let's take this beyond touchy essay for a moment. Why does this matter? Why is this so important? Because you said earlier you initially got into this because you saw the value of emotional support animals and the assistance they provide. So why is it so important to expose things like this for you?
So earlier on the show, you all talked about washing the dog. I never heard that before. She issued me a letter that can get me in trouble, criminally in trouble in Florida, because it's against the law now in the state of Florida to use a fake ESA letter. And they issued me a fake ESA letter. She puts Floridians, I'm one of them, at risk if they use that letter. She puts landlords at risk because they know these are bogus letters. But what are you going to do? Accept the letter and or let the animal in so the animal chews the little girl's face off? And what about what about the people that are truly disabled? Now they get stares and it makes it really difficult for them. So they put profit over care. And I'm going to take them to court. And I'm going to hold them accountable.
All right. Chaz Stevens, we really appreciate your time here and your transparency with all of your documentation. Thank you for taking the time to be here on Open Record.
Thanks, guys.
And we are going to answer some of your questions, the questions you asked us about service animals and ESAs, all that when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record. So we have been talking a lot since Sunday about emotional support animals, service animals. I told you it's a confusing topic for a lot of people. And we wanted to know, do you have questions? We put up a QR code on the screen after each of my stories.
They do.
And I always, this, I get nervous. I go, what if we put this up and nobody asks any questions?
Yeah.
Well, that was not a problem because just bling, 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 the emails started coming in. I got dozens of questions. I've picked out a handful that I think were ones that were broader and might help the most people. So you guys, let's fire away and see what some of these people had to ask and if I have the ability to answer them.
Okay, so the first one we have was Mackenzie in Pewaukee. She wanted to know, does a service animal need documentation or a certificate?
And I think that's a really important question here because there's a lot of talk about ESA letters and you need an ESA letter to have an ESA, but service animals, genuine service animals, do not need a certificate. There is no registration. There is no documentation. And it is one of the reasons that disability advocates, as I said earlier, say this would be such a hard thing to enforce because all you need to have a service animal is one that is trained. And by the way, you can train them yourself. You don't have to have a professional trainer. So you can have a self-trained animal that helps you with your genuine disability. And that is a service animal. As long as it's a dog, you can't be of these other animals. You can't have a service animal that's a cat.
Can you give me an example of that? Would that be if you're blind and you have a dog that helps you cross the street?
A dog that helps you walk across the street. It might be a dog. In many cases, what we find now is a lot of people who have seizures. You have dogs that by the smell, they can detect a seizure coming before it happens. They can lead a person to a nearby chair to help them. We actually saw Carissa Tank demonstrate that for us, how her dog that she has trained can lead her to a chair if she's feeling ill or dizzy. They can retrieve keys. They can open doors. There are a lot of things they can do that are specific to helping with the disability. And if they're doing that kind of work, leading a blind person or whatever it is, then that is a service animal and there is no documentation or registration needed. And if you see something online that says register your service animal, you're wasting your money. It's not necessary.
You answered this a little bit before, I think, but again, bears repeating. Madison and Cedarburg asked, do only certain breeds qualify to be a service animal?
It has to be a dog or a miniature horse, but it is not breed specific. So you can have a service animal that's a German Shepherd. You can have a service animal that's a pit bull. You can have a service animal that's a Pekingese, I suppose, if they're able to do these tasks that help you. So in terms of a genuine ADA recognized service animal, as long as it's a dog, it can be any breed.
Out of curiosity, what does the miniature horse do?
I think there's a carve out, and I think miniature horses can also be trained to perform tasks. And I don't know where the history of that comes from. I'm sure there are plenty of people in the disability community who could answer that for me. But miniature horses have a history of doing this, and so there's been a carve out in the ADA for them as well. But generally speaking, service animals are dogs.
Okay. So Andrew in Milwaukee said, what about us disabled veterans that rely on our dogs for emotional support, especially with PTSD?
I got a couple like this. And Andrew, I'm glad you asked this question because if you are, in fact, a disabled veteran with PTSD, it means you have a relationship with a healthcare provider who's diagnosed you. So that's already step one. You've got someone who knows you have this genuine diagnosis. If you have an animal that can provide task-trained services for you, that's a service animal. But if you're looking for an emotional support animal, you just need one of those providers to write you a letter that says that you have these diagnoses, the PTSD, for instance, and that you need this animal to function. But to be clear, the only right that would give you is the right to live with that animal. Your landlord can't say you have to pay extra pet fees. They can't say you can't live here because of a no pets policy. It does not mean you can take the dog everywhere you want to go unless it is a genuine, fully trained service animal.
In Hartford, Nathan asks, will this make it harder for disability to get a service animal?
And that's a good question too, Nathan. There is nothing in this law that sets up any barriers to getting a service animal. A service animal. There's no change to what it takes to get a service animal. Emotional support animals, it does add a barrier, and that barrier is that you need to have a 30-day relationship with the therapist or doctor who's writing the letter. Again, we talked about how some of the experts in these fields say they shouldn't be, unless you've got specific training in the animal bond relationship or things like that, you shouldn't be writing these letters. Many do, and they have a legal right to do so. Whether or not they should be is a different question. But it does mean you've got to have that 30-day relationship, and so it means going online and buying a $49 letter, probably not going to be as easy as it used to be. That's the only real barrier here.
So Ken in Waukesha wants to know, what 2 questions can someone claiming to have an emotional support animal ask? You kind of addressed that, but the second half of the question is, as a landlord or business owner, can you request a copy of the letter stating the animal is an emotional support or service animal?
These are good questions, Ken. And first, I want to clarify the 2 questions you're limited to asking aren't related to emotional support animals. They're related to service animals. So the ADA says the only 2 questions a business can ask are, is this a service animal? And what tasks is it trained to perform? That's it. They can't ask you for medical documentation. They can't ask you, what's your disability? They can't say, prove to me that it does these things. Those are the questions. There is no real limit on questions to ask about emotional support animals because they're not service animals. But as a landlord or business owner, can you request a copy of a letter? That's actually one of the things, the legislation that has passed both houses in Wisconsin of the legislature spells out clearly, is it says you would have a right as a landlord under the law to request documentation of the person's need for an ESA. And under the Fair Housing Act, it actually says that you as the tenant, if you want to live with one of these animals, you can't just show a letter. You first have to request an accommodation under the Fair Housing Act in writing. So you request the accommodation, and then as verification, you show that letter. Now, one other thing this law would do is it would clarify that the landlord can then reach out to the provider who gave you that letter with follow-up questions. I think they're limited in what they can say due to HIPAA, but you can at least follow up to find out, is this legitimate? Did you prescribe this? And that sort of thing. So that is what this law would do. It would it would empower landlords, I think, to at least ask for some documentation.
Yeah. John in Slinger asks, if an ESA dog in an apartment living setting attacks my pet, myself, or a child, who is responsible, the pet owner or the doctor giving the ESA certification?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
One of the things that is very clear in this law and is very clear in most of these letters that are written, if they're written properly, is that the responsibility for an animal's misbehavior, damage, anything like that, still falls on the owner of that animal. Even if you have a letter saying your animal's an ESA, because ESAs do not require training and because the law gives them no rights to go out in places where pets aren't allowed, if you take your dog into Walmart and it attacks someone, you are responsible.
That's on you. Yeah.
Now, the question would be, if, say, Touch ESA wrote a letter that was bogus and then you took that out somewhere, is there some responsibility on, for instance, Dr. Gebhardt, who writes that? I don't know, and I don't know if that's been tested. I think in the end, their letter that they issue says you're responsible. So they're sort of absolving themselves, saying you agree here, you are responsible for any damage or anything that your dog does. I think it's pretty clear it is the pet owner.
So we have Luann in West Dallas who says, several years ago, I met with a psychiatrist to have my dog certified as an emotional support animal. Even with a legal letter, stable work history, good credit score, and enough money for the rent, I was unable to find an apartment to rent. I was never chosen for the apartment. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Luann, this one's interesting and it's tricky because you talk about the never being chosen. You probably had landlords who didn't say the ESA was the reason why, and that can be tricky. But I will say this, if you have a dog that has been certified or approved as an emotional support animal by someone you have that therapeutic relationship with, and you present that asking for an accommodation under the Fair Housing Act, if they don't accept that ESA, that's a violation of the law, and you can file a fair housing complaint. You can also file a complaint with the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development's Equal Rights Division. They actually get these routinely, and we asked for copies of just the month of October, I think it was, and got quite a few. So it's pretty a common complaint that landlords are not accommodating these ESAs, and people will then complain to the Equal Rights Division or to HUD. You can make that complaint if you believe you've been discriminated against in that way. The whole not being chosen, though, if they have, it might be tricky because they might have some other legitimate reason for not selecting you. And I think that might be the trickier part here, but I think you're coming from the right place, Luann.
Yeah. Tammy in Milwaukee says, as a grocery worker, we've tried to deter people from bringing in non-service animals, but they just don't care. Where do we draw the line between a person's wanting to have their pet accompany them and the need to protect the integrity and legal rights of those with legitimate service animals?
This is tough, especially as a worker, because it's really going to be up to your company. What do they want to say? How much do they want to enforce these rules? Because a lot of places, you go to Target or Walmart, they have signs at the front that say service animals allowed, no pets. That's their policy. But I went into Walmart, and in 5 minutes, I had video of 2 different people pushing dogs around in shopping carts.
Did you really?
Yeah, it took no time at all.
Crazy.
And the thing is, you put a dog in a shopping cart in a place that has groceries, that dog, whatever bacteria they're putting in that shopping cart, you're now going around and putting groceries in. It's a health hazard.
Yeah.
But did Walmart, was a single employee said anything? No. They didn't say anything.
Yeah.
So the question is, does your company want you to be strict about this? I think most businesses want to be accommodating to people with any kind of disability. I think that's a good thing. But because of that, I think many times they're afraid to confront someone. They don't want to cause trouble. But I think there are some people for whom this is a frustration. You ask a good question, Tammy. I don't have a clear answer for you on how to deal with it, but I think it really comes down to what does your company want to do and how do they want to address that?
Do we have time for one more, you think?
Last one. I think we can get this one in.
Tiffany in West Dallas, as a social worker who works in the healthcare system, how would HIPAA confidentiality play in this? How would this documentation be checked to see if this letter is legitimate?
I think that's a good question, and I do think there are some limitations there because HIPAA does apply. We're talking about mental health diagnoses and disabilities. But what the law, if Governor Evers signs it, would do is it would say that that landlord can follow up and at least find out if this is a legitimate letter. I don't know how much they can say, and those might be still good questions for me to follow up with the author of the bill on as to how far could that sort of verification go. I do think there would be some firewalls there in how much you could say, but at least the landlord would be able to reach out to the provider and say, hey, did you write this letter and do you think this is legitimate?
All right.
I think that's guys, thanks for your questions. Yeah. Others of you, if I didn't answer your question, I'm going to try to get back to you individually. Give me some time. There were a lot of them, but we appreciate all of them. We're going to go off the record right after this. And it is time to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual, have a little fun by answering a question Sarah's got for us.
Actually, Brian had it for us this week. A lot of people will be enjoying a pumpkin pie on Thursday.
I will.
Do you enjoy it or do you not enjoy it?
I would never buy it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it's there, if it's the only option, sure. But I'd much rather have a French silk or a fruit pie over a pumpkin pie any day.
Pumpkin pie? Okay, now
there's nothing
you've lost
special.
me.
I don't know. I don't find it to be very satisfying.
Yeah,
I don't want a pumpkin pie unless it is covered in a giant dollop of Cool Whip.
Yeah, whipped cream is trash. Cool Whip is better than
Cool Whip is outstanding. Cream. Yeah, not the canned. No, I want the Cool Whip.
Yeah.
But I will say though that the one thing that tops pumpkin pie for me is pecan pie.
Oh, pecan pie is so good.
And by the way, do you say pecan or do you say pecan?
Pecan.
Pecan.
Pecan. Thank you. Thankfully, there's no
I used to work at a Baker Square in high school, so I would hand out
Baker
all
Square?
the pies.
No kidding.
Oh my gosh, it was
gosh.
actually great at Thanksgiving.
So
but
good.
those French silk pies and those
Yeah.
cream
I mean,
pies they make there.
heck
oh,
yeah.
I don't
I'm
even know
not
if
turning
it's
my
around
nose up
anymore.
at French silk. I'll be honest. I'll take that too. But I just this is the only time of year, by the way, I'll eat a pumpkin pie.
That you're not wrong.
I'm
right.
not
I don't
eating
eat
one
it
in
any other
May,
time.
even if it has Cool Whip. It's just that's not the
Yes,
right. This is a
correct.
Thanksgiving thing. Anyway.
Amen.
All right, we got to wrap things up, and we come right back.
The Fox 6 Investigators.
Is
Fearless.
that a gun in your hand?
Did you just hip check me?
Unrelenting.
We don't just ask questions.
We demand answers.
Award-winning in-depth journalism.
We are Milwaukee's investigative team.
Experienced and respected.
The Fox 6 Investigators. Because you matter. Dig deeper. Track updates. And binge watch our latest investigations only on the Fox Local TV app.
That is all the time we have on this episode of Open Record. I want to point out, by the way, we are going to be taking a holiday hiatus. So for the next, I think, 5 weeks through the holidays, you're going to be seeing some of the best episodes of Open Record that have aired all throughout the year. So enjoy those. We'll still take your ideas, your feedback, anything at FOX6 Investigators at fox.com. Send them our way. Happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays, and Happy New Year, because we're going to see you with our next new episode in January. For Sarah Smith, for Jenna Sachs, for Dave Machuda behind the scenes, and for everybody else who's part of Open Record, thank you for a great year in 2025. I'm Bryan Polcyn, and we'll see you in 2026.